I'm going to talk to you about areas that are typically considered to be classified in nature. So I'm going to afford you a caveat right in the very beginning. Yes, we will deal with areas that are considered classified. These are not the government of India's points of view. These are my points of view. And since I am not a representative anymore of the government of India, please bear in mind that these are not war plans or anything of that sort. I want to preface my talk by saying that one of the big errors that we make in analysis, especially in universities and onwards, is to consider geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geostrategy to be on the same plane. I believe that this is rubbish, and this is wrongly taught throughout our universities, and I'm standing there like Jeremiah, prophet wailing in the wind, and saying that this is actually how the structure is. Geopolitics comprises only two segments. It comprises geo-economic goals and non-geo-economic goals. And then you have geostrategies that try to achieve your geo-economic goals, and you have geostrategies that look for non-geo-economic goals. The latter includes things like culture and so on and so forth. And of course, you have interpersonal relations between the respective leaders. Our Prime Minister has introduced a feature which we might call huggability. It seems to work quite well. Let me turn with that straight away to China, and I'm going to talk to you about the subject that I've been given. I was a bit nervous about how much I should talk, but then I realized it's just me and it's not the government. So our relationship with China remains one of an uneasy and brittle peace for the reasons that have already been outlined by the General. And what I want to say is that therefore all the major components of geopolitics that I mentioned earlier are adversely affected or impacted vis-a-vis China. There have been a series of incursions which are well known. Doklam was only the last, but I want to put a thought to your minds, and that is that there will be more Doklams, and except that they may not be on the trans-Himalayan borders at all. We are going to live in the century of the seas. India has shown great dexterity in its ability to handle affairs upon the land for many centuries, and we are hopelessly naive and very, very poorly positioned in terms of our expertise in the maritime domain, and yet this is the domain that will define us over the next 200 years. We do not find, for example, university students emerging from international relations with even a modicum of awareness of what happens in the maritime domain. It is all terra incognita. So the first question that I want to pose before us is, if we were to become more accommodative, would China's behavior be less assertive or aggressive? That means if we were nicer to China, would China be nicer to us? The answer, I think, is if you watch Game of Thrones, then China is a bit like Queen Cersei. You know, the apparent lack of pushback against China's incrementally expanding claims over geographical areas generates only disdain in the Chinese mind. Because this is the behavior that is expected of vassals. And you are a supplicant, your job is to supplicate. Please supplicate. What does that have to do with me? And Queen Cersei will generally knock your head off, and this is precisely what happens in Beijing. So one of the most important vulnerabilities that China has, and India is generally gravitating towards, is its huge dependence upon external merchandise trade. Yeah, there are some areas of trade which come overland, for example, Russian oil and gas, Mongolian coal, Chinese, from Laos you have copper, and from Vietnam you have coal. All this moves inland. It is true, it moves overland. But as the Chinese philosophy of economics is shifting and they're trying to move towards a domestic economy, I think that you need to understand two features. One is, what is a 15-inch isohyet? An isohyet is a line joining places of equal rainfall. 15-inch isohyet is the minimum rainfall that you need to support an agrarian economy. And everything that lies to the east and south of this particular isohyet is occupied by the Han Chinese. West and north of that are the other ethnic populations. And if you look at the per capita GDP figures here, you will see that the per capita GDP for areas which are east and south of that isohyet are very much higher. In other words, if China is going to try and do a domestic economic revival, there is no purchasing power available. And there is no ability to actually have equitable distribution of wealth and thereby keeping the social factors of the country intact. So as China's economy keeps demanding greater and greater resources, They're going to be drawn from increasingly distant areas. These distant areas are going to come by sea. All this nonsense that you hear about pipelines and the 3 magnificent pipelines leading into China don't even cater for 15% of China's oil imports as of now. Therefore, all this stuff must come by sea. I wanted to emphasize that in 2020, China will be importing more than 10 million barrels of oil per day, which means that you will require 16 VLCCs, 16 oil tankers, or at least 7 VLCCs to come into Chinese ports every day. This is China's sources of that particular oil. And therefore, on the 12th of December in 2014, we actually had 83 very large crude carriers of more than 250,000 tons each heading for Chinese ports. And this is a staggering figure. And this is a screen grab from Bloomberg, so it's not really my imagination at work. In terms of Angola, this is Angola, and Angola remains amongst the top 3 suppliers of crude oil into China, and that crude oil has to come by sea, and it can't move anywhere through the Malacca Strait. So all this nonsense that you hear about China's Malacca dilemma is true, but it is not about the Strait of Malacca. It is about the Strait of Malacca, Sunda, Lombok, all 3. If you look at the Chinese economy, you have in 2015, which was a lean year for trade, you have the total merchandise trade of China being approximately $4 trillion US. 90% of this was seaborne. So if you just average that in that particular year, something like $296 billion worth of trade was moving on the sea. That represents to China a huge problem. It represents to India a huge opportunity. So the Chinese are forced into making geopolitical game moves in the Indian Ocean, many of which you are familiar with. Gwadar port needs no elaboration from me. I want to emphasize that this is Fedu Finolu atoll in the Maldives. It was given in 2016 on a 50-year lease to a Chinese company for only $4 million US. Maybe you think it's really far away. People only go here to get a suntan. Let me explain where it is. It's less than 5 minutes by moderate speedboat from Malé. If you look at the 1.5-degree channel where China is building a port, and in Gadu Island in Lamu Atoll, we have the Maldivians being moved out. Okay? Everybody knows about Djibouti. I'm not going to waste any time on that. Hambantota and Gwadar are familiar areas. Let me come to the subject. Collaborative collusion. How does the Chinese cards and the Pakistani cards look? Suppose we were playing bridge. This is how they look. These are Chinese cards. They are geopolitical cards, okay? They are not military cards. And therefore I draw your attention again to the military. So, great, that's Pakistan cards. And now, the question is, where are India's cards? Is India playing? India Pappu? What is India doing? And I would like to say that before I come to that, 2 very quick points. 2 armies, gentlemen, do not go to war. 2 air forces don't go to war. 2 navies don't go to war. 2 countries go to war. Yet the government of India has labored under the misconception that 2 armies can go to war and the 2 navies and air forces can go to Mauritius. So the question to be asked is, what are the various combinations of circumstances or happenstances that would convince the government of India that we are not engaged in some army skirmish? This is not some air-land battle going on. But the Republic of India is in a state of armed conflict with the People's Republic of China. If you can't answer this question, and you are a dove, then you can't evade it. If you can't answer this question, and you're a hawk, you can't engineer it. It will just stumble upon you. And we will once again reach this point of eureka moments, but we are too large a country to have a series of eureka moments defining our planning processes. We cannot have a national anthem that is replacing Jana Gana Mana by the word Arey. Arey, China idhar hai, Arey, Seychelles yahan pe, Arey, ye kaise ho gaya? Now we are too big for this, and therefore we must take into account all these factors. The questions that we must wrestle with in this room and in the media that we are not wrestling with are issues like this. Do 2 nuclear powered nations ever go to war? Will they ever happen? Will it happen? Will it not happen? Or will a full spectrum high intensity war of limited duration be the answer? Which one? And depending upon that, we have many opportunities available to us. So within the geographic competition space between India and China, since it coincides in the Indian Ocean, this I think is going to be the probable theater of conflict. If I was to be planning things, this is the strategies that I would adopt. There would be pre-conflict strategies against China, and then there would be conflict strategies. Pre-conflict, constructive engagement, everything that the general just said, everything that you know, all the things that we are doing. Distraction. Do we want, as a country, do I want the Taiwan crisis to be solved? No. Do I want that the Spratly issue should get resolved? No. It should last. It should linger. The Americans must distract the Chinese. We must not be able to be the focus of Chinese attention militarily. There are some political questions. I already addressed this first one. There's a criticality of what kind of net assessment do you do? What is India's greatest net sensitivity in a conflict with China or with Pakistan? What is Pakistan or China's greatest sensitivity? Is it the same? For example, if India's greatest sensitivity in a conflict with China is violation of territory, is China's greatest sensitivity the loss of face? Is it? Is it not? Because we will make huge plans based upon the answer to this. Our universities, our academia are magnificently silent on this. No studies, no original work, no information from the liberal arts. So we are doing sciences, we've got physics, we've got the missiles, but the liberal arts, the input is face. Is there any research-based evidence? What's the probable battle space? Why can't I get the Indian Army to understand that the principle of maneuver applies not only in a core sector but across the theater? Why can't I get India as a government, as a people to understand what is the theater? And therefore, why can't I shape the battle space? So let me understand, let me tell you that the theater that we talk about is, of course, as you know, the whole Indo-Pacific. I'm not going to go into the geography, I don't have time, but I will tell you about how possibilities might unfold. What are the combination of circumstances? Would a huge addressal by China of Arunachal Pradesh in depth or in width or in both, would that bring us to this situation? How would India's Air Force respond, because it enjoys tactical superiority of a very significant magnitude in this area? We are not pushovers. We don't export bananas to China. We're not Duterte. And so if we are talking about the plan, let me show you a flow diagram and I'll stop with that. Versus China. If I had a net assessment, India's greatest sensitivity, territorial violation. China's greatest sensitivity, face. Loss of face. Restoration of face. Possibility, face. Preparation for conflict. We need both to shape the probable battle space. How do we do that? What would we do? What would I do? I would fast track Indian Army and Indian Air Force infrastructure development in Sikkim, Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh. Are we doing that? Yes, with this government we are. In the previous governments, unfortunately, the pace of movement was both slow and incoherent. Incrementally develop Indian naval op logistic capability to support a 4,500-mile logistic line from Mumbai to Mozambique. For China to do this, to move oil from Mozambique, from Angola across to China, you need 8,500 miles of logistics. You need aircraft carriers. You need integral air. Does China have them? No. Will China get them? Yes. How much of a window of opportunity do we have? Discussion. Enhance our defensive amphibious capability in the Andaman and Nicobar. What would cause this? What would be the casus belli? Chinese military moves to cut the Siliguri corridor. Military annexation by China of Arunachal Pradesh. Expansion of Aksai Chin and incursion into Ladakh. An imminent threat to Chinese energy security stocks by India, USA, Japan, Vietnam, Australia. War required? No. Threat, and therefore conflict. How might India play it out? We think that at the strategic level, the USA and Japan should apply pressure on the PRC. We should not allow China's redeployment of its entire orbit against India. We must be able to generate theater-level maneuver. If we are getting stuck in Ladakh, or in Doklam, it is pointless in engaging in attrition. You must be able to apply the principles of maneuver. Exploit China's inability to handle a perceived loss of face. force China into this logistic line, execute trade warfare, of which I'd be happy to discuss if there's time, militarily address Chinese logistic bases at Djibouti and Gwadar. But China, even they must be having some session like this going on in China. Huh? They also must be having some chinky-eyed fellows out there. What are they thinking? Same, no issues up to here, no change. What do they want to do? They want to salami slice Western Bhutan in order to widen the Chumbi Valley. They want to enhance PLA and PLAAF infrastructure in Tibet, in Aksai Chin and opposite Sikkim. They want to push the OBOR and MSR initiatives. They want to, the BRI that is, they want to sustain presence missions. Are they doing that? Yep. They want to sustain and enhance ostensible anti-piracy missions. They must be really thinking we are stupid. Otherwise, why would you be able to say that I can use submarines against pirates? Why would you say that? Unless you think that the other guy is particularly dumb. So I think we might well be dumb, but we're not that dumb. And yet they're doing it. Strengthen the logistic bases in Djibouti and Gwadar. What would be casus belli from their side? Same. The ones which I already said. We would go to conflict. What might China's operational concept be? It might be to address the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army in width all along the LAC and in depth in Arunachal and Chumbi and Siliguri. Secure the sea lines of communication. Deploy SSNs against the Indian carrier battle groups. Threaten the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Can the Chinese carrier Liaoxing come into the Indian Ocean and operate? No. Can it do so in 10 years from now? No. But can it threaten the Andaman and Nicobar while sitting in the South China Sea? Yes. Then what should we do? Collude with Pakistan to force the Indian Navy to face three fronts. Cape of Good Hope, which is ours, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which we've mentioned, and Pakistan. All that China needs to do in collusion is tell Pakistani submarines in Karachi, dive. Finish. Don't go anywhere. Just dive. Dive in harbor. The Indian armed forces will have their knickers into a knot trying to figure out where are the submarines. But we can also play the same game. So therefore, operate through Pakistan and Djibouti to execute trade warfare, just as we were doing against an $11 trillion economy, they can do against a $2 trillion economy. So now, the balance of trade which everybody freaks out about is actually in our favor. Because you're bringing gunpatis and stuff. They are picking up genuine material. So, gentlemen, ladies, the last points I have is to ask you that these logistic bases in the Indian Ocean region, while we have not yet reached hot war, they are all assets. As soon as you reach hot war, these become liabilities. Liabilities because navies do not fight in the same way as armies fight. Navies fight wherever the enemy is, in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in the Arctic, anywhere. So Djibouti has to figure out, do you want to become a belligerent or you don't want to become a belligerent? And the answer to that is not as simple, and it allows us very many options, which I'm very happy to tell you, and this part is official, and only this part, that the Indian armed forces are engaged in precisely this kind of thing. Last point is with regard to satellites. You know, I have the whole Indian establishment, the people worrying, hey, the whole Indian Ocean is become transparent, not a bird, not a sparrow falls, but the Chinese know. Hey, to have satellites, you need ground stations. Ground stations, by a technical feat of English, need ground. Where is China's ground? And now comes the question of, if you are building a foreign office, an iconic building in the Maldives, a building in which you are saying that, you know, you will be able to talk from island to island, how wonderful, let's tie up with the EU, let's tie up with the US, you're also putting up antennae. Right now, China is forced to deploy the Yuanwang class of ships on either coast of South Africa. And this is a huge vulnerability, but if this photograph, which is a morph photograph, it is not real, it doesn't exist, it's photoshopped from end to end, is a space station at Kandy. It doesn't exist, but the inset photograph, that exists. That inset photograph shows the Chinese entering into formal agreement with the Sri Lankans to make a space station in Kandy. If this happens, then the Chinese cat will be firmly amongst the Indian pigeons. We can be accused of many things in this forum. You can be accused of the fact that the Indians don't have capability. They don't have enough capacity. We don't have enough ships. Our ships sink. Our submarines blow up. Our aircraft fall out. But we cannot afford to be accused of one thing. You cannot afford to be accused of a failure of imagination. Currently, the Indian media, the Indian public is in fact, and I don't know whether it's the government or not, I'm not in it, but we are certainly teetering towards a failure of imagination. Thank you very much.